McCarty. I'm a local food and small farms educator with University of Illinois Extension, and I serve Jo Daviess, Stevenson, and Winnebago counties in Rockford, North Illinois. Today, I was going to share some of the research we have been conducting on our day-neutral strawberry research as part of the Boots on the Ground panel. So why strawberry research? One of the questions we've gotten as I have conducted this research in 2022 has been, why did we land on strawberry research? One of the things that we considered when looking at having actual University of Illinois specialty crops research in Northern Illinois was to determine a crop that might work really well for our growers, knowing that Northern Illinois growers can have some different needs compared to other growers around the state. And one of the things that we noticed was that there was a lot of positive research in strawberries coming from in Western universities like Minnesota and Wisconsin. Many of our Northern Illinois growers will sometimes depend on the research from these two universities, just based on geographically where they're located. And as I was determining what type of research I wanted to do, I was realizing that strawberries could be an opportunity. In discussing with growers what type of research they might like to see, one of the things that kept coming back was that there was a strong demand for small fruit overall, that if they were a grower in Northern Illinois, they would be adding small fruit compared to tree fruits and compared to other fruits or vegetables out there. And so that's what was leaning more towards looking at doing some strawberry research for our group of growers. One of the other benefits you encounter with small fruits or strawberry research is that there tends to be low inputs. As much as you may consider that, yes, there is still labor that goes into small fruit, and there are still costs that go into establishing some of these crops and plots, you compare that to our perennial fruit trees that may take 3 to 4 years to get yield data and get some great information from our growers to actively use. For our strawberry research, we're able to, in 2 years, actually get good research and be able to make some recommendations. Northern Illinois growers also have a Chicago market where Chicagoans are coming out from the city to their operations and picking strawberries and other fruits at their small farms. And what we really find is that the customer base is highly focused on U-pick, and that this is an expectation that if you're growing any sort of fruit crops, that you have some kind of U-pick system that is set up and within it. And what we also have heard from our growers is that there now is a lot more supply, or rather not a lot more demand and not enough supply. So many of our growers are having to shut down for the day, sometimes during these growing seasons, because they have been outpicked and they don't have enough strawberries to really supply the consumer demand that is really there. The other issue is that because this is such a focus on a U-pick system compared to other parts of the state where it is more farm labor and so forth, there are additional markets that our growers could be missing out on because strawberries are in a U-pick and because we are growing those traditional June-bearing strawberries. One of the other challenges our growers face is that there's current growing situation in the spring and sometimes in June that's really impacting the yields and the overall ability for these plants to really thrive. Because yet again, this is a U-pick system and depends on individuals coming out from the cities and other places to pick, if the weather is not cooperative that week, whether it's too hot or too wet or potentially even too cold, there's a strong chance that consumers are not going to make that journey out to the farm to pick those strawberries. We also have some challenges with overwintering, where we're taking these June bearings after their establishment year, overwintering them in the fall into the spring, in which a late spring frost or colder springs or wetter springs could be impacting, delaying the fruiting, or even spreading potential diseases. We also have to factor in that June bearing is a short season crop, that yields will probably begin the end of June in most years and go to about mid-July. So it's a very short season. There's way more demand for this crop. There are challenges with the weather, and you still have a lot of interest in growing strawberries in our Northern Illinois situation. What we also found with this strawberry research is that while we would be able to implement U of I strawberry research in Northern Illinois, this could further be an opportunity to connect and collaborate with other Midwestern universities that could benefit Northern Illinois growers as well as other growers in Illinois with some very good boots on the ground research, if you will. Both of the photos you see here were taken from social media this past year from some of our farms in Northern Illinois. So you can see that it's very common for them to communicate via social media as to whether the U-pick is closed for the day and as to whether it's because of weather or if it is because of just being overpicked. So day neutral strawberry research then. When we talk about day neutral strawberries, we're talking about a strawberry that is being grown as an annual. So you're going to plant the strawberry in Northern Illinois at the end of April, first couple weeks of May. It is going to be growing and fruiting and flowering within the course of a season, and then you're going to remove the strawberry at the end of October. Typically about Halloween is what we tend to see, and what the recommendations are from other Midwestern universities. The main labor, especially the first 6 weeks, is the removal of runners and removal of flowers. So it's really important after planting that you focus on ensuring that the roots get established, and then, of course, let the flowers open later in the season. But that first 6 weeks in our research, and as far as what the recommendations are, strongly suggest that. Yields begin the end of July and they conclude around Halloween with weekly yields is what's possible in the system. Some of the main issues that we were certainly want to take in consideration is to determine what markets the day neutral strawberries might work for, especially if we're able to know when these are going to yield. It may mean that these may be addressing other market needs compared to, say, that U-pick market that many of our strawberry growers are used to. Because it's also an annual strawberry, it can also work well for some of our mixed vegetable operations that are growing mixed vegetables every single year. As you're talking about an annual right now, this could fit in really well with some of our rotations. The additional thing we wanted to consider was any labor that might go into growing strawberries, as certainly you're having to plant new plants every single year, and that in turn is going to be a lot more yearly costs. And because this is a much longer season crop and it's yielding fruit much longer, there's also going to be challenges with pests. Specifically, insects have been specified as ones to be considerate of. My day neutral strawberry research is funded by a USDA Specialty Crops Block Grant, and we began in 2022, the summer of 22, and it will go to January of 2024. So this is our first year of research, and you'll see photos of what that looks like. We have another year to go. I will not have as much data to really share with you today, as we still need to crunch some of those numbers, and I still need to collect another season worth of data before we can make some valuable recommendations. I'm growing 3 different varieties: Albion, Seascape, Mare des Bois. Albion and Seascape have both been recommended in previous day neutral practices and grower recommendations. We have these on 2 different sites because we do not have a research farm in Northern Illinois. The best way for us to conduct research is to find partners in our area. And the partners that were selected was Freeport High School Student Garden. This is a farm in Stephenson County that's run through the high school. It's been established for about 10 years now and is a mixed vegetable operation where vegetables go to the CSA as well as the farmers market that they run. Students are heavily involved in growing at the Freeport High School Student Garden, and they also were heavily involved in the research of the day neutral strawberries this season too. Our other partner is Matt Mead at Terrapin Orchards. This is in Jo Daviess County. His operation is June bearing U-pick system. He also does apples and other tree fruit in the fall. So both of these were really 2 different markets, and that was one of the reasons for this study, was to see how these varieties could adapt for 2 different markets and to further determine whether one market might be better than the other, or if you were going to grow it for this type of market, what special considerations might you need to take into. The other main goals of the study were really to determine suitability of varieties. By choosing these 3 different varieties, by implementing the best practices that we know with recommendations from University of Minnesota, is there any additional consideration that need to be taken into account? While we can expect yields and performance to be pretty similar to what happens in Minnesota, we also need to factor in that we are in potentially a different growing zone, and we certainly are in a different growing zone. And what comes into that play, what comes into consideration. From a management point of view, this was also important from labor needs, any pest pressure that we were observing. Flavor is one goal that we're looking at in 2023. And then does this fit with the grower? As much as these 2 different growers have 2 different markets that they're selling into, they also grow strawberries and plants different. For Freeport, they grow all of their vegetables under drip irrigation and plastic culture. And so that's what these strawberries are going to be grown under. At Terrapin Orchards, they grow their strawberries in a U-pick system without any irrigation and without any plastic culture. They address weed management with herbicides. They address weed management with straw. So that is how the day-neutral strawberries were going to be grown at Terrapin Orchards. No irrigation, no plastic culture, because we wanted to ensure that whatever the grower was doing would be commonly what they were doing. And you can see a photo of the day-neutral strawberries at Terrapin Orchards here in this photo. But overall, at the end of the day, what I wanted to know is, can we recommend day-neutral strawberries? And if we can, what would a grower really need to know? If they were not going to irrigate and they were going to grow these, when would they expect yields to occur? If they were going to grow them with mixed vegetables, what insect pressure might they need to be really concerned with? And then if they were thinking it from a labor standpoint, incorporating these into your operation, how much time, commitment, hours, and money was going to be needed in order to successfully yield these berries? The plot you see here on the left just kind of shows you what it looks like at both Terrapin and Freeport. So we have 3 different varieties that are being grown. We've replicated them twice. And basically we have 6 beds with 24 plants each, 144 plants per site. This may not seem like a lot, but in fact, by reducing the amount that we're growing, we can further extrapolate these numbers to an acre, and further extrapolate numbers of labor to an acre as well. So we will be able to, at the end of our study, be able to say that this is how much yield you would expect per acre. This is how much labor cost would also go into this too. In our research before starting this study, what I found was yield expectations of about 1 to 1.5 pounds of berries per plant is expected throughout that harvest season and harvest window. When you break down each of these, say you break down Mara Dubois A, you would then find that we are spacing our strawberries 14 inches between the 2 individual rows in that plot. And then between plants down a row, we have about 12 inches. And each plot is about 4 feet. So in essence, this is about 12 feet is what we're really talking about here. To show you some photos of what our first season looked like, day-neutral plants are typically grown as bare roots. So you purchase them from different companies, they arrive as bare roots, and then they're planted around the end of April, first week of May. That's what we did in our situation, just based on what we were expecting the growers to do. As mentioned, the first 6 weeks, you're removing flowers, you're removing any runners, and by July 14th, we started to get a pretty healthy amount of flowers begin to develop and open. It's important to recognize that between flowering and fruiting is typically about 4 to 6 weeks. So for these flowers to open July 14th, 2022, we would typically find that the strawberries would yield about August 14th to the end of August. July 28th, 2022, this is at Freeport High School. You notice the black plastic that it's growing in. So quite a lot of flower clusters on this single plant. And that was a very common thing that we were noticing throughout the growing season, is that these plants were covered in flowers. And yet again, as we look at the flowers, from 4 to 6 weeks is typically when we're expecting berries. And so if they're flowering July 28th, 2022, I am expecting berries to be harvested the end of August around Labor Day. And these are still going to flower. We're still getting weekly flowers throughout this growing season, this season-long growth of these plants. July 14th, 2022, this photo shows you one of the runners that we were removing. And that was one of the main labor that was really going into both sides, was the removal of runners every single week. The focus here was that we were not going to need them to establish and overwinter. And so by reducing these runners, by cutting them, clipping them off, it was going to allow for the plants to really focus its energy back on flowering, on fruiting, and not on trying to establish daughter plants. This photo here on the left is from September 15th, 2022, just to show you somewhat of what these berries look like. I know this is zoomed in, so it doesn't give you the full kind of quality or scale, but certainly to be getting this type of color, this type of shape, and somewhat these yields, this was something that we were really happy to see in September, especially as that was really when we were somewhat expecting the berries to be at their peak, was end of August into the month of September and October. The photo you see here on the left is September 15th, 2022. This is taken at Terrapin Orchards. So yet again, seeing good quality berries September 15th is something really rare to see in Northern Illinois, and something that we were really happy to see with as well. We've had some growers ask, what does it look like later in the season, especially as things begin to wind down? Anecdotally, what I found is that the quality of berry was actually great in October, almost better than it was end of August and in September. We really felt, based on our weather this season, that the strawberries looked wonderful. And that's the photo you see here, October 4th, 2022, is that these strawberries look pristine, and that if I was operating a U-pick operation and getting this type of quality on my berries in the month of October, I would be really happy with this if the market was there, and yet again, if the demand was there too. Our harvest for the first season tended to end about mid-October. We had a frost come in, or a little bit of an overnight freeze. And what we found is that October 13th, that week, was a bit of the last season for us. The plants were still flowering. We are still getting flowers mid-October, and yet those really weren't viable. One of the other things you can somewhat see in this photos is that we did have some insect damage. We had some other challenges with the plants at our Freeport High School location that was leading to some poor quality on the berries, and was something that we really had to address that season and will continue to address next year. So what can we really say? I haven't shared any raw data with you today other than anecdotally and some of the photos I have provided. But I still have conclusions. I still have some initial thoughts as far as what I think we might be looking at here. One of the factors that we have to really think about with mixed vegetable operations and growing day neutrals is that because you're planting these from the first week of May and you're not picking them and removing the plants until the end of October, that is a long season of insect damage and insect management. And that was one thing that we really encountered, was that because the strawberries were placed in a row beside other mixed vegetables, there was sometimes a movement of insect pressure between these different rows. And we saw lygus bug damage, we saw wasps, we saw small mammal damage on strawberries throughout the season that was really impacting the quality of these berries. And if I was to be a mixed vegetable operation and grow these day neutral strawberries, I really need to manage both of those situations. We certainly saw early yields via drip irrigation and plastic at our Freeport High School location. There's no doubt about that yields were starting to come on the end of July, and we had all of August to pick those strawberries. And then we started picking strawberries at our Terrapin site without any irrigation the end of August. That's really what we saw, is that you almost had a month ahead compared to not having irrigation. This does, of course, lead to that idea of how does the grower operate? So, of course, if you are growing mixed vegetable or growing crops with drip irrigation and plasticulture, that is a cost, that is an input. And if you don't do that, then that may factor into whether you might want to grow these or not. So that's something to keep in consideration. It's not to say that you should do this because you get an extra 6 weeks, but to say, look at how you grow your crop. Does this fit in? If it doesn't, it just doesn't. However, that delayed fall harvest at Terrapin Orchard without any irrigation may have actually been pretty great. What we found was that Terrapin Orchard opened their apple season the end of August. And that was the same week that strawberries were starting to yield there. And so every single week in the fall, the harvest of strawberries was looking really good and quality was great. The berry size was really great. And they also had their apple season open. So if I am an operation that has you pick apples, day neutrals could work really well because I could also offer day neutral you pick strawberries at the same time that folks are coming out to the apple orchard to pick their apples. And you see a photo over here, October 4th, 2020, for our Albion variety. There's that quarter, and you can see the size and quality of the berries compared to that quarter. So the fruit looked really great in October. And if folks are coming out to pick apples, this actually may be a good benefit. And you're not having to deal with any of that drip irrigation or plasticulture situation. What I do think, and I think what we'll find at the end of year 2, is that it could be acceptable for one over another. That you may define that this works really well for one system, and maybe it doesn't work well for another. And this is especially going to be true when we start looking at the finances and the inputs that are really going into these berries and some of the challenges that you're encountering as well. As we think about comparing these two systems of a CSA mixed vegetable and a U-pick fruit, and then you compare that to how they're being grown, the yield quality, and so forth, it could all be a wash. And it could all be that there's not much to compare it with, or one could be a little bit better than another. So there still is a lot to think about here, and we just have 1 year of data and 1 year of growth to really know. What I do think is that this is not going to replace June bearing strawberries. That was a bit of an initial idea, was that this could replace it. It could address those weather issues. It could address so many of the challenges with June bearing. And yet this may just complement it. It may just be that I am a fruit U-pick operation that's June bearing. I move into U-pick apples in the fall. I also do U-pick strawberries at day neutrals in the fall too. So it will just act as a complement instead of actually replacing it. And still, yet again, we do not have those finances as much as the data figured out to really make finite recommendations at this time. We still need 1 more year to collect this data to determine what recommendations we will make. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about the day neutral strawberry production. That is my email. That is my phone number. Thanks go out again to Freeport High School Student Vegetable Farm and Ben Skipor, the teacher there, who is our partner on this project. Thanks also go out to Matt Mead at Terrapin Orchards in Elizabeth, Illinois, who is our other partner. Both of them have been vital as far as having actual research in day neutral strawberries, and have been really crucial when it comes to determining how we need to do this research and what we need to look for, and how we really need to think about what we might recommend in the future. So thanks again for letting me be a part of today's project, and have a great rest of the conference.